Mrs. Jenkins was a peculiar old woman, known more for her meticulous garden than the whispers of strange occurrences that surrounded her house. Her flowers were an explosion of color that drew the eye, each petal a masterstroke painted by a meticulous artist's hand. Her lawn was so immaculate it could put a golf course to shame, not a single blade of grass out of place. Yet, she was the kind of neighbor that inspired more curiosity than friendship. Her eyes were sharp, like the point of the knitting needle she never put down, and she had a way of watching without seeming to look at you. The whispers grew louder when Mr. Jenkins passed away, leaving her all alone in the big old Victorian that had seen better days. It was said that she could hear his ghostly footsteps echoing through the halls at night, but she never seemed bothered. Instead, she would sit on the porch, knitting away under the flickering glow of the moth-ridden light, a knowing smile playing on her lips. But it was the sudden appearance of the little creatures that had the town truly on edge. At first, they were just shadows in the corner of your eye, flitting about the garden at dusk. They grew bolder, though, appearing in broad daylight, their tiny horns and pointed teeth glinting in the sun. The local children took to calling them Mr. Jenkins' pets, and they were indeed a nuisance. They stole small objects from open windows, ruined picnics with their unnerving giggles, and had a penchant for switching street signs at night. The townsfolk had had enough, but no one knew what to do. They were too fast, too clever, and their mischief too petty to warrant a call to the police. The town meeting was a cacophony of accusations and frustration, with Mrs. Jenkins sitting at the center, knitting away as if she were listening to the sweetest melody. When little Timmy went missing, the whispers turned to shouts of outrage. His mother, desperate and distraught, found one of the creatures in her garden holding Timmy's favorite toy. It looked up at her with eyes that gleamed like polished black marbles and cackled before darting into the underbrush. Mrs. Jenkins emerged from her house, her movements surprisingly swift for a woman of her age, and returned Timmy unharmed but for a small bite on his finger. The creature had left a tiny note with the toy, the ink still wet. It read, "Your son was naughty. Tell him to behave, or next time, I'll keep him." The townsfolk stared in shock, the air thick with unspoken fear. They knew now that these beings were more than just a nuisance, they were a threat. And Mrs. Jenkins was not just a peculiar old woman, she was their gatekeeper. The mayor, Mr. Thompson, called for an emergency meeting. He was a man of action, not words, and he knew that something had to be done about the creatures before more children were harmed. The townsfolk gathered in the community center, the walls lined with missing posters of various trinkets and personal items. The room was a buzz of fear and anger as they recounted their run-ins with Mrs. Jenkins' pets. Some spoke of the chilling whispers that seemed to follow you home at night, others of the cold drafts that seemed to come from nowhere. Mr. Thompson banged his gavel, calling for order. He proposed a neighborhood watch, suggesting that by banding together, they could keep an eye out for the little demons and protect their children. Mrs. Jenkins was invited to the meeting but declined, sending a cryptic message instead. "We all have our parts to play." The townsfolk took it as a challenge, and the watch was formed. Groups of 2 or 3 patrolled the streets every night, flashlights cutting through the darkness, searching for any sign of the malevolent beings. The creatures, however, remained elusive. They watched from the shadows, their eyes glinting like stars in the night sky, always just out of reach. The townsfolk grew weary, their fear turning to resentment towards Mrs. Jenkins, who continued her nightly knitting sessions on the porch, seemingly unfazed by the turmoil she had brought upon the town. One evening, as the moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows across the lawn, a group of the most determined townsfolk approached Mrs. Jenkins' house. They were armed with brooms and shovels, their eyes burning with a mix of fear and anger. They demanded she control her pets, that she put an end to their torment. Mrs. Jenkins looked up from her knitting, her smile never faltering. "You want me to control them?" she said, her voice a gentle purr. "Very well." And with that, she clapped her hands together once, sharply. The creatures emerged from the darkness, surrounding the group in a sea of tiny, malicious grins. "But," she continued, "you must remember, dear friends, they are not just pets. They are the guardians of balance. If you wish for their mischief to cease, perhaps you should look within yourselves." The townsfolk stumbled back, horrified by the creatures that now ringed them. They were so close, their breath was hot, and smelled of rotten fruit. Mrs. Jenkins stood, knitting needles in hand, and the creatures parted, allowing the group to retreat. As they stumbled away, they heard her cackle, echoing through the night like a twisted lullaby. The creatures grew bolder in the following days, their pranks more sinister. The townsfolk were now afraid to leave their homes, and the whispers grew to a fever pitch. The horror of the situation was palpable, a living, breathing entity that suffocated the once peaceful town. They knew that Mrs. Jenkins held the key to their salvation, but they also knew that the price might be more than they were willing to pay. The question was, what kind of balance did she seek? And would they be able to restore it before it was too late? A week passed, and the town remained on edge. The neighborhood watch had turned into a grim vigil, with people taking shifts to stand guard outside their homes. The local store had run out of flashlight batteries and holy water, and the air was thick with tension. Then, on a still night with no moon, something changed. The creatures grew quieter, their mischief less frequent. The town held its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It came in the form of a town-wide power outage, plunging everyone into complete darkness. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant wail of a child and the patter of tiny feet scurrying across rooftops. In the town square, a single candle flickered to life, casting a pool of yellow light. It grew brighter, revealing Mrs. Jenkins standing before them, her knitting abandoned. She spoke with a voice that was both soothing and commanding. "I have made a deal with them. They shall leave your town in peace, but you must give me something in return." The townsfolk, desperate and trembling, asked what she wanted. She held out her hand, revealing a small wooden box. "In this box," she said, "are the souls of your naughtiest children. Choose one to stay with me, and the rest shall go free." The townsfolk gasped collectively, eyes wide with horror. Who among them would be sacrificed to the whims of these malevolent guardians? Who had been naughty enough to warrant such a fate? Mrs. Jenkins' smile grew wider, her eyes gleaming with a dark amusement. "You have until dawn to decide. If no one steps forward, I shall choose for you." And with that, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving the candle to burn out, the town to argue, and the fate of their children hanging in the balance. The night was long and fraught with fear and accusation. Families huddled together, whispering about their neighbors' misdeeds. The creatures watched from the edges of the darkness, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. As the first light of dawn began to break, a figure approached the square. It was Timmy's mother, her face a mask of determination. She held the note with the bite mark, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. "Take him," she said, her voice firm despite her trembling. He was the naughtiest of all. The creatures surged forward, the box opening to accept the proffered soul. The town watched in shock as Timmy's mother embraced the creature, whispering something in its ear before it retreated back to Mrs. Jenkins's garden. The power flickered back on, and the townsfolk slowly dispersed, their fear now mixed with a newfound dread of the price they had paid for their safety. The whispers grew quieter, but they never truly stopped, a reminder of the pact they had made with the guardians of the night.